The most powerful fleet in our sector ran from a single unarmed ship, and I was the sensor officer who first saw it on my screen, and I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand the thing I understood too late that day. That you cannot fire on a ghost, because a ghost is not asking you to fight. It is asking you to remember. Let me tell you who I am, and where I was, so you understand how I came to watch the Vohrann Imperium flee without firing a shot. My name is Tavik Sarn. I am of the Vohrann, and at the time of this story I was a junior sensor officer aboard the Indomitable, the flagship of an Imperial battle group patrolling the edge of Vohrann space. The Vohrann Imperium was a great power, one of the truly great ones, old and proud and absolutely confident in its own strength. We did not flee from things. That was the whole identity of the Imperium, drilled into every officer from the first day. The Vohrann do not retreat, the Vohrann do not yield. The Vohrann are feared across half the galaxy, and we had earned that fear, with our fleets and our discipline and our willingness to use both. I had grown up believing the Imperium was the strongest thing in existence. Standing on the bridge of the Indomitable, surrounded by the finest warships our civilization could build, I had no reason to doubt it. We were power. We were the thing other people fled from. I should be honest about what I was in those days because it matters to what I became. I was a believer. I had joined the Imperial fleet young, full of pride, certain that I served the greatest civilization in the galaxy. The Vohrann are not Vohrann, we are a subject people, one of the many species the Imperium had absorbed over its long expansion. But I had bought the Imperial story completely, the way the conquered sometimes do, more loyal than the conquerors themselves. I believed the Imperium brought order. I believed its strength was righteous, its fleets a force for stability, its enemies the kind of people who deserved what they got. I did not ask questions about how the Imperium had grown so large, about what had happened to the worlds and peoples that were no longer on the maps, about the things that great powers do in the dark to stay great. I was proud to serve. I wore the uniform like it meant something clean. I tell you this so you understand that the Phantom ship did not just frighten me that day. It began the slow, terrible work of showing me what I had actually been serving, and that work is the real story, far more than the ghost ship or the fleeing fleet. The Phantom did not come to teach me anything, but it taught me everything in the end. And then, on a quiet patrol, on an ordinary watch, a ship appeared on my screen that should not have existed, and I watched the most powerful fleet I had ever known turn and run from it like frightened children, and not one of my commanders would tell me why. I want to describe the moment I first saw it because I have replayed it 10,000 times. It was the dead middle of a long shift, the boring heart of a routine patrol, and I was watching my sensor board the way you watch something you do not expect to change. The Sahl Drift, the region we were patrolling, was empty space, dead space, a stretch of the dark that nothing came through, which is why we patrolled it so lazily. And then a contact appeared. Just appeared at the edge of my range where a moment before there had been nothing. No warning. No drive signature approaching. No transit flare. One moment the dark was empty, and the next there was a ship in it, drifting, silent, running dark. A ship that my sensors could see but could not identify, could not match to anything in the Imperial database, could not classify at all. I should tell you about the Sahl Drift itself, because the name will matter, though I did not know it yet. It was a dead region, as I said, a stretch of empty space that the Imperium patrolled but no one ever transited, a place ships avoided, though no one could quite say why. There were old stories about it among the crews, the kind of stories spacers always have about empty places, that the Sahl Drift was unlucky, that something had happened there once, that you did not speak of it on watch. I had dismissed these as the superstitions of bored crews. Every dead patrol zone has its ghost stories. I did not connect the name of the drift to anything. It was just a region on a map, a boring assignment, a place where nothing happened. I did not know, none of the junior officers knew, that the Sahl Drift had a history, a buried one, and that the reason the senior Vohrann officers were so quiet whenever they patrolled it was not boredom but something much closer to dread. The Sahl Drift was a grave. And on that ordinary watch, the thing that had been buried in it began, after years, to rise. I called it out the way you are trained to. Contact, bearing mark, distance close, unknown configuration. And my watch officer came over to look, and I will never forget the way the words sounded when she said them, because there was something underneath them that I did not understand yet. She looked at my screen for a long moment and she said, very quietly, "That's no ship we recognize." She did not say it the way you say it about an unknown vessel. She said it the way you say it about something that frightens you. And I looked up at her and I saw that her face had gone strange, not alert, the way an officer's face goes when there is a threat, but pale, stricken, the face of someone seeing a thing they had hoped never to see. And she turned and she called the senior officers to the bridge, and her voice, when she did it, shook. "I want to tell you about the ship, because it was the strangest thing I have ever seen, and the strangeness was the first clue to everything. It was not a warship. That was clear immediately, even before we got a good reading. It had no weapons that we could detect, no gun emplacements, no missile housings, nothing of the hard, aggressive geometry that warships have. It was large, but it was not built to fight. It was built, I would realize later, to hold long and broad and full of spaces, the shape of a ship made to carry many people, a transport, a liner, a hospital ship, something civilian. And it was a wreck. As we got closer readings, the picture sharpened and it was horrifying. The ship was scarred, battered, holed through in a dozen places, the kind of damage that no vessel should be able to take and still hold together. It had been through something terrible. It looked, frankly, like it had been destroyed, like it was a thing that had died years ago and had no business moving through space at all. And yet it moved. Slowly, silently, running dark, no lights, no signals, no drive signature my sensors could find, it drifted toward us through the Sahl Drift like something the dark itself had exhaled. A dead ship that had not finished being dead. As my sensors refined the image, I began to see details that I have never been able to forget, details that turned my unease into something closer to grief, though I did not yet know why. The wounds on the ship were not the wounds of a battle between equals. I had seen warships after engagements. I knew what it looked like when two armed vessels fought. This was not that. The damage was all of one kind, concentrated, deliberate. The marks of a vessel that had been fired upon again and again, and had not at any point fired back. There were no scorch patterns from its own weapons, because it had no weapons. There were no signs that it had maneuvered to fight, only the long, desperate scars of something that had tried and failed to run. And worst of all, as the image sharpened, I could make out markings on the hull, faded now, scorched, but still legible. The universal markings of a medical and refugee vessel, the symbols that every civilization in the galaxy recognizes and that every law of war declares must never be fired upon. A protected ship, a ship of healers and the helpless, marked plainly for anyone to see, with the symbols that are supposed to make a vessel untouchable. And it had been fired upon until it was a wreck, by someone who had seen those markings and fired anyway. I stared at those faded symbols on my screen, and a cold understanding began to form at the very edge of my mind, an understanding I did not want and pushed away, because it pointed somewhere I was not ready to look. That is why we called it a phantom, because there was no other word. A ship that should not exist, that appeared from nowhere, that bore the wounds of a death it had somehow not completed, drifting silent and dark and unrecognized toward the most powerful fleet in the sector. A ghost ship, a phantom vessel. And the moment the senior officers reached the bridge and saw it on the screen, something happened that I had never seen in my career and never saw again. The Vohrann Imperium, the great proud Imperium that did not retreat and did not yield and feared nothing, panicked. I have to try to convey how wrong the ship felt on the sensors, because the wrongness was its own kind of message. A ship moving through space leaves 100 signatures, drive emissions, heat, the electromagnetic noise of a living vessel, the 1,000 small signs that say a crew is in here. Systems are running. This thing is alive. The Phantom had almost none of them. It moved, but my instruments could find no drive doing the moving. It held its course, but there was no helm noise, no station keeping, no sign of anyone steering. It was not cold and dead like a true wreck, and it was not warm and alive like a crewed ship. It was something in between, something my sensors had no category for, a thing that moved with purpose but showed no sign of anyone alive to give it purpose. Watching it on my board was like watching something that the laws of the universe had quietly agreed to ignore. It should not have been moving. It should not have been holding course. It should not have been broadcasting. By every reading I could take, it was a dead ship, a wreck, a thing that had been destroyed years ago, and yet it came on, steady and silent and certain, straight toward us, as though death were a thing it had simply declined to accept until it had finished what it came to do. I had never been frightened by a sensor reading before. I was frightened then, not of being attacked, of the sheer impossible patience of the thing, the way it came on as though nothing in the universe could stop it, because the thing that drives it was not an engine at all. I watched it happen. I watched our admiral, a hard old Vohrann who had commanded fleets in real wars, go white as he looked at the Phantom on the screen. I watched him not order an attack, not order a hail, not order any of the things you order when an unknown ship approaches your fleet, but instead, in a voice I had never heard from him, a voice with fear in it, order the entire battle group to come about and withdraw, to run. From a single unarmed, half-destroyed civilian ship that had not fired a shot, that could not fire a shot, that was doing nothing but drifting silently toward us. The most powerful fleet in the sector turned and fled, and I sat at my sensor board in utter confusion, and I did not understand, and no one would explain. You have to understand how wrong it was to watch us run. I had served the Imperium my whole adult life, and I had never once seen it retreat from anything. We were the thing that did not retreat. It was the core of everything we were. I had watched this same fleet hold position against odds, advance into danger, stare down powers that could have hurt us, because that was the Vohrann way, the thing we were proud of past all reason. And now, against a single unarmed wreck, we were fleeing, the great engines of the battle group burning to put distance between us and a ship that could not possibly threaten us. The whole proud machine of imperial power turned to flight by a thing with no weapons at all. It was so wrong that some of the crew did not believe the order at first. I saw it on their faces, the moment of surely I misheard, before discipline took over and they obeyed. We ran from a ghost. The Vohrann Imperium, terror of half the galaxy, ran from a drifting wreck full of dead names. And in the running, without yet knowing why, I understood that everything I had believed about the strength and the righteousness of my empire had a crack in it, a deep one, and that the Phantom had appeared precisely to widen that crack until the whole comfortable structure of my loyalty fell through it. I have to tell you what the bridge was like in those minutes, because it was the thing that told me, before I knew anything else, that something was deeply wrong. A Vohrann bridge under threat is a disciplined place. That is the whole pride of us, the calm competence, the orders given crisply and obeyed instantly. I had been on the bridge during real engagements and seen it, the cold machine of Imperial command working exactly as it was built to. This was not that. This was something I had never seen. The senior officers, the ones old enough to have served a long time, looked at the Phantom and did not behave like officers facing a threat. They behaved like people facing something from their own past. One of them, a commander I had always thought of as fearless, actually backed away from the main display, physically backed away, as though the image on it might reach out and touch him. The admiral's hands, when he gave the order to withdraw, were not steady, and underneath the orders in the spaces between them I heard the senior officers saying things to each other, low, fast, not meant for junior ears. It can't be. It was destroyed. We made sure. There's nothing left out there. Fragments like that. The language not of soldiers facing an enemy, but of guilty people facing a thing they thought they had buried. I did not understand it. But I heard the fear, and I heard the guilt under the fear, and I knew, the way you know a thing in your gut before your mind catches up, that the phantom ship was not a mystery to my commanders. They knew exactly what it was. And what it was the worst thing that could possibly have appeared in that dead and avoided stretch of space. There was one other person on that bridge who felt what I felt, and I want to mention her, because she became part of what happened later. She was another junior officer, a navigator, a young Vohrann named Resh, and unlike the senior officers, she had no idea what the phantom was either, and I watched her face as she watched the names scroll on the secondary display, and I saw my own confusion and dawning horror mirrored there. The two of us, the youngest on the bridge, were the only ones who did not understand what was happening, and so we were the only ones reacting to it honestly, with the simple human response of people seeing the names of dead children and not yet knowing the reasons they were supposed to look away. Our eyes met across the bridge for just a moment in the middle of the panic and the flight, and something passed between us, a shared question, a shared refusal to pretend this was nothing. I did not know Resh well then, but in that moment I knew that she had seen what I had seen, and that she, too, would not be able to let it go. The senior officers fled the phantom because they knew what it was. Resh and I were troubled by it because we didn't. And it would turn out that not knowing and needing to know was the more dangerous thing, because the ones who already knew had made their peace with the burying, and we had not and could not. But I saw one more thing before we ran, and it is the thing that began to unravel the mystery for me, the thing I could not stop thinking about as we fled. As the phantom drew closer, my sensors finally caught something, not a weapon, not a drive signature, but a transmission. The ship was broadcasting very faintly on an old frequency, a signal so weak we had almost missed it. And it was not a threat. It was not a challenge. It was not any of the things a ship broadcasts before a fight. It was a list. A long, quiet, endless list, repeating over and over, scrolling through my translator faster than I could read, and as I caught fragments of it, as I understood what I was seeing, the cold went through me that I have never been able to forget. The phantom ship was broadcasting names, thousands of them. Name after name after name, repeating, endless, a roll call of the dead being transmitted into the dark by a ship that should not exist. And the Vohrann Imperium was fleeing from it as though those names were the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. I could not stop reading them. Even as the Indomitable came about and ran, even as the order to withdraw rang through the ship, I sat frozen at my board, watching the names scroll past. They were not Vohrann names. They were not Vohrann names or any of the names of the Imperium's many peoples. They were strange to me, names in a script and a pattern I did not recognize, soft names, names with a music to them that was not the hard music of the Imperium. And they came with other things attached, fragments my translator caught and rendered, ages. Many of the ages were small. Child, the translator kept saying beside name after name. Child, child, infant, child. It was not a list of soldiers. It was not a casualty report from a battle between fleets. It was a list of the kind of people who do not belong on any list of war dead. The young, the old, the ones who are never supposed to be counted because they are never supposed to be killed. And the phantom was reciting them, all of them, thousands of them, into the empty dark of the Sahl Drift, patiently, endlessly, the way you might say the names of people you refuse to let be forgotten. I did not yet know whose names they were, but I knew, watching them scroll while my empire fled, that they were the names of something the Imperium had done, and I knew that the doing of it had been terrible enough that the mere recitation of the names was enough to make the most powerful fleet in the sector run. Let me tell you what those names were, and why my empire ran from them, and what I learned when I disobeyed my orders and stayed behind to find out what the phantom ship actually wanted, because it wanted something. I could feel it, even then. The ghost had not come to fight us. It had come for something far worse, And the reason the proud Vohrann Imperium fled without firing a shot was not that they were afraid of being destroyed. It was that they were afraid of being remembered. I could not let it go after. That is the thing you have to understand about me, the thing that made me the one who found out the truth. I could not let it go. We fled the Sahl Drift, the whole battle group running from an unarmed ghost, and my commanders never spoke of it again. And the official record, when it appeared, said nothing about a phantom ship or a list of names. It said only that the patrol had encountered a sensor anomaly and adjusted course, a lie so small and so smooth that I understood at once it had been written by people practiced at writing exactly this kind of lie. And that was supposed to be the end of it. The junior officers were not to ask. The matter was closed, but I had seen the names. I had seen child, infant, child scroll past my board while my admiral's hands shook, and I could not unsee it, and I could not make my peace with serving an empire that fled from the names of children it would not explain. So I began, quietly, carefully, in the way you have to be careful when you are a junior officer of a subject people poking at the secrets of the Imperium, to find out what had happened in the Sahl Drift, what the phantom ship was, whose names those were, and what my proud, powerful, righteous empire had done that was so terrible that a single unarmed ghost reciting the dead could make it run. What I found is the rest of this story, and I warn you now, it is not a story about a haunted ship, not really. The phantom was real, and I will tell you what it was, but the true ghost in this story was not the vessel drifting through the Sahl Drift. It was the thing my empire had buried there and tried to make never have happened, and the phantom had come, after all those years, to make sure that it could never be buried again. Let me tell you what rose out of the Sahl Drift, and why it could not be killed a second time, because you cannot kill a thing whose only weapon is the truth, and whose only demand is that you remember. It took me 3 months to find the truth, working in secret, and when I found it I understood why my empire had buried it so deep. Because it was the kind of truth that, once known, makes it impossible to keep serving the people who did it. Resh helped me. The young navigator from the bridge, she had felt what I felt, watching the names scroll, and when I came to her carefully testing, she did not report me. She joined me. The two of us, a subject species sensor officer and a young Vohrann navigator, began quietly pulling at the threads of a thing the Imperium had spent years sewing shut. It was dangerous work. We both understood that. The Imperium did not look kindly on officers who went digging in its buried places, and we were nobody, junior, expendable, the kind of people who could disappear without anyone asking questions. But we had seen the names. And once you have seen the names of dead children scroll past while your admiral flees, you cannot go back to pretending you didn't. I should tell you how we did it, because the difficulty of it was itself part of the lesson. The truth was not in any record I could simply pull up. That was the first thing we learned, that the Imperium had not merely lied about the Sahl Drift, it had erased, thoroughly and professionally, the way only a great power can erase. There were no records of a ship called the Meridian. There were no records of an action in the Sahl Drift 11 years before. Where those records should have been, there was nothing, not a redaction, not a sealed file, but a smooth blankness, as though the events had simply never occurred. And that blankness, once I learned to see it, was everywhere, and it was its own kind of confession. Because you do not erase a thing that did not happen. The very perfection of the absence was the proof that something had been there. So Resh and I learned to read the silences, to find the things that should have been in the records and were not, the patrol logs with gaps, the personnel rotations that made no sense, the senior officers who had served in the sector 11 years ago and would not, under any circumstances, speak of it. We pieced the truth together from its own erasure, from the shape of the hole the Imperium had cut in its own history. It was slow, and it was frightening, and more than once I was certain we had been noticed and were about to disappear. But we kept pulling the threads, because the names would not let us stop, and slowly the shape of what had been buried began to emerge from the dark. Here is what we found. The ship was called the Meridian. It was human, and it had died in the Sahl Drift 11 years before, on a day the Imperium had worked very hard to make sure no one remembered. I have to tell you about the humans, because at the time I barely knew them and what I learned changed everything. The humans were not a power in our region. They were distant, relatively new, a species the Imperium had had little to do with. But 11 years before, there had been a humanitarian crisis on the edge of Vohrann space. A plague, a famine, the details no longer matter, among one of the small subject peoples of the Imperium, a people the Imperium itself had left to suffer because helping them was not worth the cost. And the humans, hearing of it, had done the thing the humans do. They had sent help. Not a fleet, not soldiers, a hospital ship. The Meridian, a great unarmed vessel full of doctors and medicine and supplies, crewed by healers, marked with every protected symbol in galactic law, sent across the dark to help a suffering people that their own Imperium would not lift a finger for. The Imperium had not wanted them there. That was the root of it. The suffering people were Imperial subjects, and the Vohrann did not permit outsiders to come into their space and help their subjects, because it made the Imperium look weak. It made plain for everyone to see that the Vohrann would let their own people die rather than spend the cost of saving them, and that it took foreigners, humans, to do what the Imperium would not. The Meridian's mercy was an embarrassment. It was a humiliation. It showed the galaxy that the great Vohrann Imperium was the kind of power that let its subjects starve, and that the humans were the kind of people who crossed the galaxy to feed them. And the Imperium could not tolerate that. So the Imperium gave the order to remove the embarrassment, the order to make the humans and their inconvenient mercy simply disappear. I want you to sit with the obscenity of that because I have for years, and it does not get smaller. The humans had done nothing wrong. They had done, in fact, the most right thing it is possible to do. They had seen a people suffering and dying, a people that were not even theirs, a people the whole galaxy had agreed to ignore, and they had crossed the dark to help them, asking nothing, bringing only medicine and food and their own willing hands. There is no nobler thing a people can do. And the Vohrann Imperium had looked at that nobility and seen, not a kindness but a threat, because the kindness exposed the Imperium's cruelty, simply by existing beside it. The Meridian did not have to say a word against the Vohrann. Its mere presence, healing the people the Imperium had abandoned, was an indictment, a mirror held up to the Empire's face, showing it exactly what it was. And the Empire could not bear the reflection. So it shattered the mirror. It murdered the healers rather than be shamed by the healing. That is the thing I had served, I understood, reading the records in the dark, a power so frightened of being seen as cruel that it would commit a far greater cruelty to hide the first. There is a kind of evil that is worse than mere brutality, and it is this: the evil that kills the good simply because the good makes it look bad. That was the Sahl Drift. That was my empire. They destroyed the Meridian in the Sahl Drift. An Imperial battle group, the same kind of battle group I served on, perhaps some of the same officers, intercepted the hospital ship as it crossed the drift, and they fired on it. On a marked, unarmed, protected vessel full of doctors and the sick people they had already taken aboard. The Meridian broadcast its protected status. It broadcast its mercy mission. It begged them to stop. They did not stop. They fired until the great healing ship was a wreck, until everyone aboard was dead, the human doctors, the human crew, and the thousands of suffering subjects the humans had taken aboard to save. Thousands of dead. Healers and the sick and the children they had been trying to save, all of them, murdered in the dark of the Sahl Drift by an empire that found their rescue embarrassing. We found a fragment of the Meridian's final transmission, buried in the one place the Imperium's erasure had missed, a corrupted backup in an old relay station, half destroyed, but enough. I listened to it. I have never been able to stop hearing it. It was the voice of the Meridian's captain, a human, a woman. Her name was Sarah Aqui, I learned later, and in the last minutes with the Imperial guns tearing her unarmed ship apart, She did not curse the Vohrann, and she did not beg for her own life. She broadcast, over and over, in a voice that stayed steady even as everything came apart around her. This is the hospital ship Meridian. We are unarmed. We are a medical vessel under galactic protection. We have wounded and children aboard. Please, please stop. There are children aboard. Please. And then when it was clear they would not stop, when the ship was dying, her voice changed. And the last thing on the recording, the very last thing, was Captain Aqui beginning to read names. The names of the people aboard her ship. She had started in her final minutes to recite the names of everyone who was about to die with her, so that there would be a record, so that they would not vanish unnamed into the dark. She got through perhaps 40 names before the recording ended. 11 years later, the ship she died on was still reading them, finishing, I understood, the roll call she had begun with her dying breath. The humans had not built a weapon. They had simply picked up where their murdered captain left off, and kept saying the names, until someone made the Empire listen. And then the Imperium had done the second thing, the thing that great powers do after they do the first thing. It had buried it, erased the records, declared the Sahl Drift an exclusion zone, told the humans when they came asking after their lost ship that the Meridian had been lost to an accident, a navigational tragedy, a thing no one could have prevented. And the galaxy, which does not like to make trouble with great powers over distant tragedies, had let the lie stand. The Meridian became a sad story about a hospital ship lost in deep space. The truth that the Vohrann Imperium had massacred thousands of healers and refugees to protect its own pride was buried in the Sahl Drift with the dead, where the Imperium was certain it would stay. That was 11 years ago. And now the Meridian had come back. I want to tell you what the Phantom actually was, because we found that too eventually, and it is the most extraordinary part. The Meridian had not risen from the dead. There was no ghost, no supernatural thing, nothing that violated the laws of the universe, though it had felt that way on the bridge. What had happened was, in its way, even more remarkable. When the humans finally learned the truth, and they did learn it years later, through means I never fully understood, perhaps a survivor, perhaps intercepted records, perhaps simply the patient refusal of a people who do not let their dead go unaccounted for. They had not responded the way the Imperium expected. They had not sent a fleet. They had not declared war. They had done something stranger, and the Imperium would learn, far more dangerous. They had found the wreck of the Meridian, drifting where it had been murdered. And they had repaired it, not as a warship, not as anything that could fight, but as itself, as the hospital ship it had been, restored to drift again. And they had installed in it a single system, a beacon, an autonomous caretaker, a quiet, patient intelligence whose only function was to carry the ship back into Vohrann space, and to broadcast endlessly on every frequency the names of every soul the Imperium had murdered aboard it. The Phantom was not a ghost. It was a memorial. A floating, drifting, unkillable memorial, sent by the humans into the heart of the Empire that had tried to erase it, to do the one thing the Imperium could not allow, to remember, out loud, where everyone could hear. And that is why the Imperium fled, not because the Meridian could hurt them. It could not. It had no weapons. It never would. They fled because the Meridian was the truth, made into a ship, drifting into their space to be seen, and a power that has built its strength on a buried atrocity cannot afford to be near the proof of it. To fire on the Meridian would be to destroy it a second time, in front of the whole galaxy, to be seen murdering a memorial to the people you already murdered once. To hail it, to acknowledge it, would be to admit it was real. There was nothing they could do that did not make it worse. The only thing left was to run, to flee the names, to put distance between themselves and the thing they had tried to bury, and to pray, the way guilty powers always pray, that it would simply go away. But it would not go away. That was the genius of what the humans had built. The Meridian did not chase. It did not threaten. It simply came drifting, patient, unkillable, broadcasting the names into Vohrann space again and again, wherever the Imperium tried to avoid it. You cannot flee a thing that does not pursue. You cannot defeat a thing that does not fight. You cannot bury a thing that has already risen. The humans had found the one weapon against which all the Imperium's power was useless, a truth that would not stay dead, carried by a ship that could not be killed without proving the truth true. I had my answer. I knew what the Phantom was and what my empire had done and why it ran. And I want to tell you that knowing it broke something in me, broke the loyalty, the pride, the clean feeling of the uniform, all of it, and left me with a question I could not escape. Because I was an officer of the Vohrann Imperium, I served the power that had murdered the Meridian, and now I knew. So what was I going to do about it? I have to be honest about how much it hurt, because the hurt is the truest thing about this part of the story. I had built my whole life on the Imperium. I had given it my loyalty, my pride, my sense of who I was. I, an Vohrann, a subject, had wrapped myself in the Imperial story more tightly than the Vohrann themselves, because it had given me a place to belong, a thing to be proud of, a meaning. And now I knew that the thing I had been proud of had murdered thousands of healers and children to protect its own image, and had lied about it, and would have gone on lying forever, and that I had worn its uniform and served its fleets and called its strength righteous the whole time. The grief of that is not a thing I can fully describe. It is the grief of discovering that you have given your devotion to something that did not deserve it, that the clean thing you served was filthy underneath, and that your own hands by serving are not clean either. I wept, alone in my quarters, the night I finally understood all of it. Not for myself. For the people on the Meridian whose names I now knew, some of them. For Captain Aqui, reading names as she died. And for the version of myself that had believed, right up until the Phantom came, that I served something good. That self died in the Sahl Drift too, 11 years late, killed by the same truth the Empire had tried to bury. And out of its death, something else began to grow, something the Imperium would have found far more dangerous than any enemy fleet, an officer who had stopped believing the lie. Let me tell you what Resh and I did with the truth we had found, and what happened when the Meridian came again, and this time, instead of fleeing it with the rest of the fleet, I made a choice that no Imperial officer was ever supposed to make, because the Phantom had not come only to be remembered. It had come, I came to understand, to give the living a chance to choose, and I was about to take it. We could not bring back the dead. We could not undo the Sahl Drift, but we could do the one thing the Imperium had murdered thousands of people to prevent. We could make the galaxy remember. And so Resh and I decided to finish what Captain Aqui had started, and what the Phantom had carried for 11 years. We decided to make the Empire listen. It took us most of a year to prepare, and I will not pretend it was not terrifying. We were 2 junior officers planning to do the most forbidden thing imaginable in the Vohrann Imperium, to take its deepest buried secret and hand it to the whole galaxy. If we were caught, and we were nearly caught more than once, we would simply vanish, the way the Meridian had vanished, the way everyone who threatened the Imperial story vanished. We knew that. We did it anyway because we had seen the names, and because some things, once you know them, leave you no choice but to act, unless you are willing to become one more person who knew and said nothing. We had decided not to be those people. It is the only decision I have ever been entirely proud of. There was a night I was certain it was over. A security officer came to my quarters late, unannounced, the way they come when they have decided you are a problem, and questioned me about my access to certain archives, about queries I had made, about a pattern someone had flagged. I sat across from him and I lied calmly for an hour with everything Resh and I had built hanging on whether he believed me, and I have never been so frightened in my life, not even on the bridge with the Phantom. He left, finally, unsatisfied but unable to prove anything. And I sat alone afterward, shaking, and I understood how close we had come, and how easily the Imperium could make us disappear, and I thought, for one long cowardly hour, about stopping. About destroying what we had gathered, going back to being a quiet, loyal officer, letting the names stay buried, choosing to live. I want to be honest about that hour because it was real, and because the choice to go on was not made once but made again and again, every time the fear came. What pulled me back from stopping was not courage exactly, it was the recording. Captain Aqua's voice, reading names as her ship died around her, refusing to let them vanish unnamed even with the guns tearing her apart. She had been more frightened than I would ever be, and she had said the names anyway with her dying breath. I could not look at that courage and choose, out of my own smaller fear, to let it have been for nothing. So I went on. We both did, and we finished what we had begun. Here is what we did. We gathered everything. The records we had reconstructed, the fragment of Captain Aqua's final transmission, the proof of the order and the cover-up, the whole shape of the atrocity that the Imperium had cut out of its own history. And we prepared to broadcast it, all of it, to every world we could reach at the moment of maximum effect. And we waited for the meridian to come again, because it would come again. That was the thing about the Phantom. It always came again, patient and unkillable, drifting back into Vohrann space to recite its names, no matter how many times the Imperium fled. We had studied its pattern. We knew, roughly, when and where it would next appear. And we arranged to be there, Resh and I, having gotten ourselves assigned to a patrol in the right sector, waiting for the ghost to keep its appointment with the empire that had made it. It came, of course it came. On a quiet watch in a dead stretch of space, the meridian drifted out of the dark once more, silent and scarred and broadcasting its endless roll of the dead, and once more the Imperial fleet I was attached to began the now familiar ritual of panic and flight. The admiral on this ship was a different one, but the reaction was the same. The white face, the shaking order to withdraw, the desperate flight from the unarmed ghost. And this time I did not flee with them. This is the choice I made that no Imperial officer was ever supposed to make. As the fleet came about to run, I took my station. I was sensor officer again, the same role, the same board, and instead of helping the fleet flee, I opened a channel. Every channel. I took everything Resh and I had gathered, all the proof, all the truth, the whole buried weight of the Sahl Drift, and I broadcast it to the fleet, to the sector, to every relay that would carry it, out into the galaxy where it could never be called back. And I did one more thing, the thing that mattered most to me. I opened a channel to the meridian itself, to the Phantom, to the patient caretaker intelligence that had carried the names for 11 years. And I said, my voice shaking, an Vohrann officer of the Vohrann Imperium speaking to the ghost of the ship his empire had murdered, I said, Meridian, we hear you. We've heard you. I know the names. I know what they did to you, and I'm not going to let them bury it again. The whole galaxy is hearing you now. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. And the Phantom answered me. It had never answered anyone. In 11 years of drifting and broadcasting, the meridian had only ever transmitted the names, the endless roll of the dead, nothing else. But when I spoke to it, when I told it that I had heard, that I knew, that I would carry the truth, the caretaker intelligence aboard it did something it had never done. It stopped reading names. For the first time in 11 years, the roll call paused. And in the silence, a new transmission came from the Phantom, an old recorded message, something Captain Aqua must have left in the ship's systems against the chance that someone, someday, would finally listen. It was her voice again. And it said, if you're hearing this, then someone finally stopped running. Thank you. That's all we ever wanted, not revenge, not war. Just for someone to stop running and turn around and say the names with us. The dead don't need to be avenged. They need to be remembered. You've done that now. You can let us rest. I want to tell you about the silence that followed, because it was the most profound thing I have ever been part of. For 11 years, that ship had been transmitting names into an indifferent dark, and no one had stopped, and no one had answered, and the names had simply gone on and on into the void, unheard. And now, for the first time, the void had answered back. Someone had stopped. Someone had turned around. And the ship, the patient, unkillable, grieving ship, could finally fall silent. Its long vigil ended because the thing it had been waiting 11 years for had finally happened. The silence where the names had been was not empty. It was the silence of a watch finally relieved, of a burden finally shared, of the dead finally heard. I have never known a silence so full. And I understood, sitting in it, weeping at my station, that this was what the phantom had come for all along. Not to frighten the Empire. Not to be avenged, just this. Just for one person to stop running and say, I hear you, I know the names, you can rest now. That is all the dead ever ask of the living, to be remembered, to be named, to not have happened for nothing. And for 11 years, the most powerful empire in the sector had fled rather than give them even that. And it had taken 2 junior officers and a broken ship, and a recording of a dying woman's voice to finally, at last, let the dead of the Sahl Drift rest. Fleet was in chaos. Commands were being shouted to shut down my channel, to silence me, to flee faster. But it was too late. The truth was out. It was racing across the galaxy at the speed of light to every world, carrying the names of the Meridians dead and the proof of who had killed them. And there was nothing the Vohrann Imperium could do to call it back. The thing they had murdered thousands of people to bury was now known everywhere forever, beyond any power to erase. The Phantom had won. We had won. The dead of the Sahl Drift had their witness at last. I learned later how it spread, and it is the part that still gives me hope, even now. The broadcast went out and it could not be stopped, and it did not stay in our sector. It jumped from relay to relay, world to world, carried by everyone who heard it and could not bear to let it be silenced. Within days, the names of the Meridians dead were being read aloud on worlds I had never heard of, by peoples who had no connection to the Sarn dead or the human healers, simply because a truth like that, once it is loose, finds something in everyone that refuses to let it die. There were vigils. There were demands for accountability. Other subject peoples of the Imperium, hearing what had been done in the Sahl Drift, began to ask what had been done to them in the dark, that the Imperium had also buried, and the questions, once they began, could not be stopped either. One murdered hospital ship, one list of names, one broadcast from a junior officer who finally turned around, and it began to bring down the lie that an entire empire had been built on. That is the thing the powerful never understand about the truth. It is patient, and it is contagious, and the moment one person stops running and turns around and says it out loud, it becomes something no fleet in the galaxy can defeat. They arrested me, of course, me and Resh both. We had known they would, it was the price, and we had agreed to pay it. What we had not fully expected was that it would not matter, that the truth, once it was out, would be bigger than any punishment the Imperium could impose on the 2 officers who had released it, because the galaxy heard, and the galaxy did not let it go. The other powers, the ones who had let the Meridian lie stand for 11 years, could no longer afford to, not with the proof broadcast to everyone, not with the names known, not with the humans' patient memorial vindicated for the whole galaxy to see. The pressure came down on the Vohrann Imperium from every direction. There were inquiries. There were consequences. The Imperium that had seemed eternal and untouchable was revealed in the end, to be exactly as vulnerable as any liar is the moment the lie is known. And the revelation of the Sahl Drift was the beginning of a long unraveling that I will not detail here, except to say that the Imperium that exists now is a smaller, humbler, more accountable thing than the one I served, and that the change began with a phantom ship and a list of names. And the Meridian, the phantom, kept its rest in the end. Once the truth was known, once the names had been heard by the whole galaxy, once the dead had their witness, the ship stopped its endless drifting. The humans came for it, finally, openly, no longer needing to send a ghost because the truth was out in the light. They took the Meridian home. They buried their dead with their names spoken aloud by everyone at last. And they did not seek revenge on the Imperium, not war, not destruction, because Captain Aqui had been right in her recorded message. The dead did not need to be avenged. They needed to be remembered. And they were. That was enough. That was all it had ever been about. I served 11 years in an imperial prison for what I did. I do not regret a single day of it, because I think about the alternative, about the version of me who saw the names scroll past and looked away, who fled with the fleet and made his peace with the lie, and went on wearing the clean-feeling uniform of a power that murdered healers. And I know that I could not have lived as that person. The phantom did not save me by frightening me. It saved me by giving me a choice, to keep running from the truth or to turn around and say the names. I turned around. It is the only thing I have ever done that I am certain was right. They thought no one would come, the dead of the meridian, drifting unnamed and unavenged in the dark, murdered and erased by a power that was certain it had gotten away with it. And no one came for 11 years. But the humans do not forget their dead, and they do not let the truth stay buried, and they had built, out of a murdered hospital ship, the one weapon that no empire can defeat, a memory that would not die. The Vohrann Imperium fled from a single unarmed ship without firing a shot, not because it could destroy them, but because it carried the names of the people they had killed, and because some truths, once they begin to be spoken, cannot be silenced again no matter how powerful the silence. You cannot fire on a ghost. I learned that on the bridge of the Indomitable the day my empire ran. A ghost is not asking you to fight. It is asking you to remember. And the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, it turns out more dangerous than any fleet, any weapon, any empire, is a people who will cross the dark and wait however many years it takes, and never, ever stop saying the names of the ones the powerful tried to erase. Say the names. That is the whole of it. That is what the phantom taught me. The dead are not gone as long as someone, somewhere, refuses to stop saying their names.